Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and I'm here today to talk about my top 10 favorite modular games. And I mean something very specifically when I talk about modular games. Um, for this, I'm referring to games where the core experience, so the core game experience, involves plugging in one or more modules that are part of the core game that have a significant impact on gameplay. So I'm not just talking about variable setups where maybe you have a few tokens or tiles that are slightly different than in a previous game. I'm also not talking about player asymmetry, where each player is a different character or a different faction, things like that. That is a different thing. It feels modular, but I'm talking about core game modularity here. I'm also not including expansion modules. So I think a lot of the examples that might come to mind, and it's totally fair for discussion, just not for this top 10 list, are games where expansions have added modules that you can optionally plug into the game. For example, Scythe has a bunch of expansions, including expansions with modules within those expansions where you can plug them into the game and change the shape of the game a little bit. But I'm not including that. I'm talking about where the core game is designed around the idea where modules shape the core game experience. I had some great picks from ambassadors who are far more eloquent than I am in explaining how this modularity works for the games that they selected. And so I am going to jump into what they have recommended here, starting with Julio at number 10. So Julio has suggested, I'll put this up on the other screen. There we go. Julio has two picks here. One, and I'm going to loop them into number 10 here. So the first one he mentioned is Rallyman, GT, and Dirt. He says both Dirt and GT are purely modular with the way that the tracks are built. And this is a common theme that you'll see throughout this video a little bit. So that sometimes the modularity is about the map itself, the map changing and changing in a significant way that impacts gameplay in a significant way. He says it's purely with the map, the way the tracks are built. With the base box, including two types of cars to choose from, this game is essentially infinitely modular. I haven't played Rallyman GT, so I'm assuming that when he's talking about the cars, that it's not player asymmetry, that all players are using those cars that are different. That would be modular in this example. Also, a game that I've heard a lot about that I'm actually very curious to play is Shackleton Base. This is Julio's other pick that is modular based on the definition that I'm using here today. And in Shackleton Base, in every game, you play with 3 out of the 7 agencies. So there's like 3 different corporations that are funding or incentivizing you to do stuff on the moon on Shackleton Base. That's what you can see here, here, and here. There are 7 in the box. You're plugging 3 of them into the game. And from what I've heard, they have a significant impact on the way that you play out the game. So I think this is really cool. And this is perhaps the best example that I'll have on this entire list of a truly modular game where the core experience of Shackleton Base depends on you plugging in these 3 modules that have a significant impact on the game. So that's one of the reasons that I really want to play Shackleton Base. So I can talk more informed about it. I intend to do that in the near future. At number 9, I have a pick from Aryn. This is a game that I have not played called The Elder Scrolls Betrayal of the Second Era. Aryn says about this, he says, which region of Tamriel beckons you? Is it Morrowind, Skyrim, Black Marsh, or somewhere else? There are several options to choose from when setting up the game. Each one has its own map that you'll explore with its own unique system, its own conflict encounter cards that you'll shuffle with a small number of general conflict encounter cards, its own peaceful encounter cards that too will be shuffled with a small number of general peaceful encounter cards, and unique enemy tokens that will be added to the general enemies pool. As I'm reading this, it sounds like a lot of setup to do, but it sounds like it leads to a truly modular experience, which is what Aryn is talking about here. Aryn says, to say this is a large game is an understatement. But with these different region modules comes a ton of variety. Black Marsh is the simplest region mechanism, having a simple weather system that affects how many spaces you can move on the map. The Skyrim region has towns under turmoil, which turns town encounters, which typically are just a page in the book, into a battlefield where you have to physically move your pawn to the various destinations in town to perform the physical town actions, which also are dealing with enemy combatants. I'm only scratching the surface of the modularity of this game. There's also the characters themselves, the skill lines you will choose that affect the core puzzle. The guild you accept your quest from even decides your overarching mission for this session. So, fellow adventurer, where in Tamriel would you like to go? As I'm reading this, Aryn, I think, did a great job of explaining how many different elements are modular in this game. And I do want to differentiate this a little bit from scenario play. I think scenarios are very similar to modules. And again, there's a lot of overlap with these different definitions. But for the way Aryn describes it, you are plugging in different elements to create a new unique experience rather than a scenario where it says, like, this is the scenario that you're playing. Here's what you need to add to make this happen. It's more the game deciding what you're playing versus you saying, I'm going to plug in these different elements and play with them for this module. Dillon, another ambassador, recommends Empires of the Void 2. And this is another one that I really want to play. This is from Ryan Lockett at Red Raven Games. Dillon says, during setup, 8 planets are chosen to be included in the game, which determine which alien allies are available that game and how the power card deck gets built, which has a huge impact on the flow of the game and the resources, opportunities, and semi-narrative events. This has always been one of my favorite 4X style games because it's a little friendlier. Defeated units are just displaced, not destroyed, and planets can be taken over with strength or with diplomatic influence. But certain planets can incentivize you to go with the opposite strategy for different rewards. The game feels like the perfect blend of 4X and a tight Euro. The only downside is that all modular setup does take some work to put together and reset, though there's a promo event deck available that streamlines it. And I'm glad Dillon mentioned that. I think that is one of the potential downsides of a heavily modular game where there is a lot of setup and takedown too. I think the takedown is almost worse because you're like, oh, we finished playing the game and now and you have to sort out all these different components. But it looks like it's worth it in Empires of the Void 2. And last at number 7, the last ambassador pick here and panelist pick, we have Skiler, who picked Fossilis. And I should have mentioned that Aryn is primarily a solo gamer, Dillon is a heavier gamer, and Skiler is a family gamer. She's our family gamer panelist. Skylar says that Fossilis is a fantastic game for families. My kids love the tactile fun of sliding the chunky terrain tiles to find out where dinosaur bones are hidden underneath. And there's a big toy factor to this game, which I have played. I love completing the bone sets to claim a dinosaur card. It has modularity with various suggestions for adjustments to accommodate different levels of difficulty. I can easily customize the difficulty depending on the age that I'm playing with. For example, if I'm playing with my 8-year-old, we remove tool cards and the majority scoring as she prefers not to have any conflict. If I'm playing with my 7-year-old, we don't play with varying energy costs of the dig tile as she prefers a faster game. I love that there's a list of these changes and the reasons for choosing them included in the rulebook. I love that Skylar mentioned that because I like that the modularity in this game and some other games are not just focused on variability, but also focused on difficulty and player preferences and age ranges and things like that. I think that is a great space for modularity in a game like this. And it makes me think a little bit of the video I filmed about difficulty scaling and how that can feel like a modular game as well. Some honorable mentions before I continue on to the top 6 are Nature, which I haven't played, but I've heard is highly modular, where you're plugging in different elements. Smash Up, which I also haven't played, but the core concept of Smash Up is that you're shuffling 2 different decks together, and that forms the deck that all players are using to gain cards from. Marvel United, which I played once, which does have a lot of modularity in terms of the scenario you're trying to defeat and the space you're trying to defeat that in, as well as the player asymmetry, but we're not including that for this definition. And Clank and Space has some different modules that you're plugging in. My number 6 pick, though, is Spirit Island. Spirit Island is a cooperative game where you're plugging in several different modules, and we have one other cooperative game on this list where you're doing something kind of similar, where one of the modules are the colonists who are trying to come to this island to colonize the island, and you're fighting against them. And these colonists are, I don't want to say vastly different, but they are definitely different in the way that they work. I would say fairly different, like pretty different in the way they have different objectives. They pursue different things. They come in with different levels of advancement. That can be more of a challenge or easier. Of course, the game has asymmetry in terms of what the different player powers are, but the main modularity is the map and the colonists. Those are the 2 modular elements that are making the game different. And even though I will talk about one game on this list that only has one modular element, but if you change something big enough, I think that counts as modularity when you're changing like one big thing in the setup of the game that persists throughout the game, that changes the shape of the game. I think that counts for modularity. But in this game, we have 2. We have the map and we have the colonists themselves, not the settlers. So that is Spirit Island, number 6. And number 5, we have SETI. SETI does something I think is really, really cool with modularity, which is that you plug in 2 different alien species into the game, but you don't know what they are until you actually discover them. So you get to discover the modularity as you actually play the game. So there's 5 different ones in the core game. You put 2 of them in, so it leads to some variability. We have two different combinations of things that do have a pretty big impact of the game from then on. Once you discover those alien races and alien species. I also think this is particularly clever in this game because the game is entirely science-based until you get to the aliens, and then you add a little dose of sci-fi. So I love that this is one of these like there's a big range of nature-themed games now, nature-based games, but I love the idea of adding a little bit of superlative fiction to those games, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of fantasy that you unlock at a certain point in the game. SETI does this with the 2 alien species modules. That is SETI at number 5. At number 4, we have Cthulhu Death May Die. And this, in addition to Shackleton Base, may be the best example of modularity on this list because you're plugging in several different elements that have a significant impact on the game. You have, and again, you have the characters. I'm not counting character modularity here, or character asymmetry, but you have the monster itself, the great old one, and you also have the setting. You have where that old one is coming in. You have this map that you're exploring. And I think that's a great way, if you're thinking about doing a modular game, I think that's a great way to think about it. Map plus some other element that is interacting on the map that you have to interact with. Spirit Island did the same thing. Map plus colonist. This is monsters plus map. Yeah, I think this accomplishes that really, really well with how the shape of the map and what the monsters add to this particular combination, these 2 modules, really changes how you might play in this scenario or in this modular combination in Cthulhu Death May Die. And it leads to a lot of replayability as a result. So that's Cthulhu Death May Die at number 4. At number 3, I'm combining 2 games in one because they both are racing games that are fairly similar, different mechanically, but fairly similar in that the core modularity comes from the maps themselves, the tracks. So this is Heat and Downforce. In both of these games, there's a lot of the decisions that you make in the game come from the tracks themselves, where the tight corners are, where the tight spaces are, like in the Downforce track, where you're going to have cars get into really tight spaces where only one can fit by. Some of the tracks in Downforce have entirely different rules that you need to consider. And then Heat, included in the core game are a bunch of modules that you can plug and play with as you play the game. It feels like they included a lot of expansions in the box, but they're in the core box, so they are modules instead that you're plugging in to decide, like, okay, are we going to draft abilities this game? Which map are we going to play in? I haven't gone that deep into Heat, so I don't know how vast those modules are, but I know the game is acclaimed for the number of modules that it has in the game. I think I prefer Downforce because it's so streamlined, and I like the variability that the maps add to it. But I definitely wanted to give Heat a big shout out here for the modularity it offers to the racing game genre. So that's Heat and Downforce at number 3. At number 2, we have Lost Ruins of Arnak, which is what I was alluding to earlier when I say that sometimes there is one big chunky thing that you're adding to the game that makes it modular. And in Lost Ruins of Arnak, it is the temple track. So in the core game, there's 2 different temple tracks, one on either side of the board. There's also more in expansions that you can add, but again, today I'm talking about the core game. In the core game of Lost Ruins of Arnak, the different side of the board and the different temple track on that side of the board makes the game feel significantly different. These paths that the designers, Min and Elwyn, have lined out, and the different benefits that you get along the way, the different obstacles that you encounter, some different rules also on the temple track, really make for a different experience in this game. So I really like that. I like this idea that a game can feel significantly different based on one big thing that you are changing every time you play. And I also like that there's enough paths on this temple track that even playing the same temple over and over again can feel very different. I think that's impressive too, that it isn't just like, okay, we've played that module, let's move on to a different module. You could really play the same temple track over and over again in Lost Ruins of Arnak and get plenty of replayability out of it. Last, though, at number 1, this was almost a last minute addition because I had forgotten how modular Clank is. But I wanted to throw Clank in here. I love Clank. Clank is a hasting dungeon crawl style game where you're diving into the dungeon, you're grabbing a bunch of different things that are worth different amounts, and you're trying to race back out of the dungeon using deck building the whole time. And Clank is highly modular based on the side of the board, based on the map that you're using. In the core box of Clank, you have a double-sided board, so you have 2 different maps that really do change the your considerations for how you are moving throughout the game. Again, I'm not officially counting the expansions for this list, but the expansion maps in Clank do really change the feel of the game. They add new cards to the game, they add new maps, but even just the change in the map alone in the core game, similar to just the change in the temple track in the Lost Origins of Arnak core game, it really does make the game feel different. And it kind of it opens up that design space for other maps to be added with deeper twist into the rules. So I think Clank, is my favorite modular game, where just with the map modularity, just flipping over which side of the board you're going to play on, can really make each game feel quite different every time you play. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Modularity, again, as I defined it early on, that we're not talking about expansions, we're not talking about player asymmetry, we're not talking about a lot of little things that you're changing to set up. We are talking about big modules that you're plugging into the game that are built into the core experience, and they are making the game feel different or unique or harder or easier or shorter or longer. I love these different options that a module can add to the game. And I'd love to hear your examples. This was a tough thing to search for, and so I'm sure you will think of some examples that I didn't think of. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.